Welcome to the Money Talks Decoding Finance YouTube channel, where it's all about destigmatizing the conversation around money and building wealth. Allow me to bring you Money Talks every Sundays. Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Harpreet Gill. Welcome back to my channel, Money Talks, where we decode all areas of finance. And today's topic is a topic that everybody needs to get familiarized because it's all about planning before a crisis hits. A lot of times we talk about, planning properly and making sure that we're planning to mitigate as much as we can that can happen to us in our personal finances. But a lot of times what happens is that we don't think that the most devastating things can happen to us, or we're just not thinking about it. We think we're young, we're invincible, and we can kind of like go on life without really paying attention to the smaller things that we don't realize that can impact our future. And we talked about in one of our episodes the importance of insurance, whether it's critical illness, life insurance, disability insurance, and how that's supposed to help to mitigate some of the financial burdens and impacts, God forbid, if anything was to happen to our family or ourselves. And today I have a very special guest who I've known for a very long time. We've known each other for about 6-7 years now. I actually met him at one of my old jobs, and we just kept a good friendship in the time. And I want him to share his story because his story is a powerful one. It's one that many of us can learn from. And I kind of want to dissect into some of the journey that he's gone through in the last year. He's been diagnosed with testicular cancer, and he's gone through a tough year. And I really want to get some more insight from my good friend, Adi Dasgupta. First of all, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time with us. But, tell us some more about who you are. Tell us who is Adi. Let us know about yourself, and we'll get into your journey after that.
Awesome. Yeah, blessings, Harpreet. I hope you and your team are doing well. Really uncertain times right now, and uncertainty seems to be the focus of this conversation. Right. Real quick about me. I went to school to be a teacher, and I came out realizing that there's different ways of learning than just in a classroom. And right. So I've taken a lot of my training in teachers college and in my studies studying English literature towards working in classrooms, community centers, and workplaces, helping people to learn, supporting different abilities, different types of communities, young people, old people, very, very young people, and old people who are young at heart, with being able to learn, being able to understand how they learn, and using their learning to create cool things. And so outside of my work in the community, I also run a business called Vibe Creative Labs with two really dope business partners who bring a background of finance, fashion, and social work towards helping local artists and creatives in the city of Toronto, as well as any kind of community agency or charity, to do something different, to kind of reimagine the work that they do and the people that they help, and just help get any kind of art out there. Because I think in these trying times, we need some art in order to help our wellness and just promote imaginative thinking.
Absolutely. And I think creativity is, the mother of imagination. And when our creativity gets stunted, I think it creates a catalyst of different issues, whether it's depression, anxiety, so on and so forth. And I think that the work that you're doing is so important. So thank you for sharing that information with us. I know that this last year has been tough just before even this pandemic hit. I know when we connected earlier this year, you had told me that you were diagnosed with testicular cancer, and my heart just honestly dropped the minute that you told me that, because a lot of times we talk about this topic of cancer or illness, and it's usually a friend of a friend of a friend, or 3 generations away from you. It's never hit too home. And one of the things that I'm realizing now, that being in this seat where I'm an advisor, I'm seeing so many more young people being affected with such crazy sicknesses. But I want you to bring us back to the day that you were first diagnosed with cancer, and what was going on in your mind at that time, and how were you feeling?
Sure. Yeah. It's funny. Time has flown. But in July of 2019, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer, and they did before within days of the diagnosis, I was already on the operating table doing my first operation. And to answer your question in terms of what was I feeling, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think I was truly allowing myself to feel anything. And I think it's because, you know, a lot of your friends and family and people in your network who follow you, they probably see how steadfast, ambitious, and driven you are. And that, I think that's what has kept me continuing to admire you both from afar and up close as your friend. And so I too was trying to carry that kind of ambition into, my life. And so it's kind of one of those things that just hits you in the face. And you can't say I didn't I don't know anything about it, because we're bombarded with information about things like cancer and heart disease and, you know, COVID now, but you're right. You assume mortality and you think none of this is ever going to happen to you, and especially in your young years, when the only thing that you see getting in the way of success is your own energy and effort.
Right.
So to answer your question in a roundabout way, I think it just came as a surprise that I wasn't really prepared for.
Honestly, it's I can completely understand why at that time you might have not felt anything. I remember when I was 19, I got diagnosed with an ulcer where I was having internal bleeding. And at the time, I had no idea what to think, what to feel. All I thought was, oh my God, is my life going to end now? And I don't know if you kind of went through a similar experience like that, because you hear all this language from the doctor that you don't even comprehend, you don't understand. But all you hear, maybe cancer, or you hear you're internally bleeding, or you hear that one little thing, and then it's just like almost hopelessness that kind of just falls into your lap at that moment, right? And you don't realize how great our health, or how much we take our health for granted, I should say, right? But I can imagine, having to be diagnosed and then having within days go through an emergency surgery. What was that experience like for you?
It was interesting because I actually never told any loved ones or family about this, because initially I was just really scared and I didn't really know what was happening. And a lot of people say that after your first surgery with regards to testicular cancer, you're probably losing one of your testicles. And so, of course, as an insecure man, as most men are insecure and struggle to admit that they're insecure, of course, we put a lot of stock into displays of masculinity and what our masculinity really means out in the outside world. So you're gripped with that. You're gripped with the fact that you're harboring this secret from, the people closest to you, and you're doing that because you want to protect them from the uncertainty of it all. But you're also doing it selfishly because you don't want to have that tough conversation. So all of that is happening, but I'm just kind of putting blinders on and focusing on the operation itself.
Right.
And ultimately, it was just insane because uh, when crises take place, oftentimes we're not so willing to open up and get the help that we need, even if we know that the support and the help is there.
So Adi, I want you to kind of like bring us even further, because, at least, because we're friends, I know a bit about your journey, but I know I'm going to also learn more in today's conversation. But I know that your journey didn't end after that emergency surgery back in 2019, when you were first diagnosed with your cancer in July. There was just so much more to it. Can you let us know what had happened after your surgery? I'm assuming you thought everything was good?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people say, that, once you start talking about having that initial surgery for testicular cancer, you start to see a lot of men start talking to you about how,
hey, my father went, or my brother went through that, or grandfather, and so on and so forth. And they usually say this, and you know what? It ended there, and it ended there. There wasn't anything else to do after. And I started going to the Princess Margaret Hospital just for checks. Now, by the time that Christmas came around, I had to do one more of those checks. And, there's different ways that they do these checks. There's blood tests, there's CT scans, there's a number of tests that they can do. And everybody's cancer is going to be a little different. And they found that I had something called a lymph node. We all have a bunch of lymph nodes all around our body. And there was one that I had near my kidney. And that one, they had found a cancerous lump on it. And it hit me by surprise because, again, that assumption of mortality, the assumption that, you know what, I'm through the woods, everything is okay because most people are okay at this point. I bought into that. And then I was really shocked because they said you're going to have to do 9 weeks of chemotherapy, which is 3 cycles of 3-week chemotherapy. And you're not going to be able to go to work. And and then it started dawning on me. Oh, this is the cancer that they talk about. This is what it's really about. And I kicked 2020 into gear. Literally January the 6th, I started chemotherapy, and it finished in end of March. You then have to do another one of them CT scans. You go through an electronic donut, if you will, and they found that, you know what? Things were getting a lot better. The tumor shrank a lot, but it didn't fully go away. So you're going to have to do one more surgery. And that was a really, really, to an extent, kind of recovering from to this day. But they essentially had to go in and take the cancerous material out.
So what you mean to tell me is after you got diagnosed with your testicular cancer and they had removed the cancer, another cancer had formed in another area of your body.
The thing is that testicular cancer can spread. Cancer in general has the ability to spread. And while we continue to invest time and money into researching it, sometimes there's a lot of things, as I found through navigating through the healthcare system, that we just don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty that even the most prized experts just don't know. And there was a lot at this, nobody knew.
Wow. I can't even fathom, and then you said you had to go through a second after your 9 weeks, was it, of radiation and chemo? What was that experience like?
So the thing about chemotherapy is that we use a lot of drugs and substances to zap all the growing cells in your body that are healthy. And it just essentially destroyed everything that was like healthy and growing in my body, including some of those cancerous cells. And it also made me lose all my hair. I lost a lot of weight. I lost my complete immune system, which wasn't very fun as the news began to understand what a pandemic was and what this COVID was. And it was weakness. I felt dejected. I hated getting out of bed, a lot of nausea, just drugs on drugs on drugs, no appetite. You harbor this underlying anger at everything and anything, more because of having a bad mood and stuff. But it was inspiring to see how a lot of other people were able to resiliently battle through it. But, pardon my language, chemotherapy is a bitch,
I can imagine. And, it's crazy that, it's unfortunate you're not the first person that I've known who have been diagnosed with cancer in the very short recent history. I've had other colleagues, friends, family, friends, and things of that sort who have been diagnosed with it too. And that's the similar experience that they say is, when you are going through radiation and chemotherapy, your energy is drained. You're literally, everything that's in you gets sucked out. And, the mere fact that at least I can say that, just witnessing your strength, your resilience, to kind of like push past that, because I'm sure you had moments and days where you didn't feel so positive, where you didn't feel so great. As you mentioned, you were feeling nauseous and you were feeling defeated. I can't imagine, and especially with COVID too, because like as you said, you went through radiation January 6th at the beginning when just before COVID, we discovered COVID, I should say. Yeah, I can't imagine having to deal with the bearings of this news at the beginning of this year, especially 2020 was, uh, it's been a crazy year. And moving forward into 2021, I don't see things shifting as quickly as we might have thought. But having to deal with COVID and then also having to deal with the cancer, what was that like? Especially knowing that, you hear the people who have a weak immune system, you just mentioned you had no immune system. How did that make you feel?
It was interesting. Think um, I think my experience was unique because there was so much stuff happening to everybody's lives this year. So even though I was going through a hellish of a time, it seemed like a lot of people were going through a rough time.
Right.
In addition to that, I felt that the chemo was it was a daily thing where instead of looking at it as a long term I needed to complete, I had to literally take it one day at a time. And with the addition of COVID, it was just an extra stressor. But because of how much uncertainty and nonsense had been taking up in my life up until that point, I wasn't really mentally that stunned by it. At that point, I was kind of rolling with the punches because at that point, well, I mean, things are already going kind of haywire. I might as well just keep it going. And so I did build a lot of resilience that I don't think I ever had prior to all this before that. I wasn't a Lance Armstrong type of person before all of this. And so the ability for me to build some resilience, I think, catastrophic things like the chemo, like COVID, like the passing of somebody like Kobe Bryant, there was a lot of things happening this year that I could pair my chemotherapy or my cancer battle with and kind of gain some context so that I could better understand where I was going.
So, Addie, I know that you had talked about earlier, you mentioned that when you were first diagnosed that you did not tell any of your family or friends about what you were going through. And, I wanted to emphasize that just like this is something I kind of, mention a lot. And I say this to my clients, say this to my family, my friends, that, just like how there's so much stigma around the concept of money and our finances, a lot of us don't talk about it, but a lot of us don't talk about the struggles that we're facing with our health either. And I think that that's a lot of time, the narrative or the story that kind of plays a part as to why we stigmatize this is because we're supposed to feel strong. We're supposed to deal with things on our own. We don't want to burden people with our health or financial issues. And I kind of wanted to pick your brain in terms of like what you were going through and what was it that made you hold back from telling your story to the people that care about you the most?
Yeah, I think the word that you said is key, burden. You can't help but feel like you are being a burden when you're pumped with bravado and an ego that you're going to take over the world. You feel like any problem that you're going through, it's either a test for you to deal with on your own, or you look at it as if it's a burden if you were to put it on somebody else. And I'm not saying everybody thinks that way, but I'm saying that I caught myself thinking that way throughout this process. And I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Right.
And it's not just with health, it's even with finances.
Yeah.
So many people who struggle through immense financial issues, but there's a few little tips, a few key words, a few signatures that just need to happen to change everything. But there's too much shame to talk about circumstances that might be a little bit tough. And I think that that's so poisonous because the only thing in the way is a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of humble pie. You know what I'm saying?
Right, right. And what was
It
that conversation like with your family, your parents, your siblings? Like, what did that conversation look like?
Yeah, it was right when I was about to start chemotherapy. I told them because I knew I would have to leave work. I knew I was going to look very different, and I knew there was a chance I finally would have to, recognize that I can't do this on my own and I'm going to need some help. Everything was so breakneck fast because the holidays were approaching, and I
Right.
needed to simultaneously get in touch with my workplace, figure out how EI was going to work, figure out how I was going to get to my chemotherapy appointments in the first place because they're all downtown. And if I don't have an immune system, public transit is probably not the best idea.
Right.
Finances, savings accounts, paying rent, all of these things are just buzzing through my head. And
Wow.
so, whether I wanted to or not, I had to have that conversation.
And what was that conversation like when you did have it?
You know what? It got emotional, and it was definitely awkward, but it was ripping the band-aid off to something that now I can talk about very matter of factly, very easily.
Right.
And the communication is two-way. It's benefited both parties because now the people who I talk to about what I go through, they can also feel more comfortable talking to me about what they're going through as well. And
Right.
that shared comfort, I think, is quite beneficial. Um, yeah.
And I want to ask you a personal question, and you're more than welcome to decline this. But I've heard from other friends who have gone through something similar as you, say that some of the people that they thought were their closest family, their closest friends, actually ended up taking a big step away from them. And I wanted to kind of hear about your experience. Did you get the support that you needed from your family and friends? Did you realize people's true colors during this journey? What was that experience like for you?
Wow. Yeah. I did. I definitely saw true colors, not just of people that I know, but just when you go through some weird situation, you become very introspective. I remember when I was 16 and I got robbed for the first time successfully, and you suddenly start questioning everything that happens in this planet, right and wrong and whatnot. And so similarly here, there were a few people in my life who kind of took a very big step away. And initially, you feel a sense of hurt, you feel a sense of sadness, but then you begin to recognize that I can't personalize real estate in my head that I'm actually making any money off of in the first place.
Right.
And it also stopped me from focusing on all the beautiful people in my life who were supporting me, who were caring for me, who were, sending me messages of motivation, dropping things off, or just letting me know that, they were around if I needed anything. I think when people go through tough times, a lot of people believe that it makes you tougher, but sometimes it makes you tougher at a certain cost. And I can safely say that thanks to the people that I had around me, I don't think I lost my humanity or optimism in human beings in the process. And I'm tremendously indebted to my family, my friends, my business team. Everyone held me down in ways that I could not even imagine. And to those who stepped away in ways that I couldn't even imagine, the thing is that I don't actually harbor any kind of negative feelings in that sense,
Right.
because these kinds of scenarios, and perhaps some of the financial planning that you provide, it reminds us just how short life is, and that I can't really be walking with any negativity the same way I don't want to walk around with credit card debt.
Right, right. Well, I'm so glad to hear that you were able to receive the support that you needed from your friends and family. I'm so glad to hear that people were able to step up, and whether it was through messages or dropping something off or just checking in to see how you're doing. I'm so glad that you were able to have that support from them. One of the now that being an advisor and helping people with insurance needs, investments, and all that other stuff, I always emphasize to people how crucial it is to have some sort of insurance in place, whether it's life insurance, critical illness, or disability insurance, because it takes a lifetime to build wealth. And I remember that, when before you got diagnosed with your cancer, we had a conversation, and I was urging you that you get some insurance. And at that time you were focused on building your down payment, because that was the priority, to get yourself into a house. But what are some of the financial impacts that you faced during your journey, as you were facing your health issues?
Yeah, man, that's a great question, because I was actually taking inventory of that now that the year is coming to a close and we're all slowly making sense of what 2020 was. But I mean, I was taken away from work, so I didn't have a consistent source of income,
Right.
but my bills were consistent.
Mm.
My bills were perpetual.
Yes.
Medications coming out of nowhere. Random times I would need to go to a hospital and use an Uber. Um, the uncertain expenses increased as my life became more uncertain, and I had to dip into my emergency fund. And something that's interesting about that is that I didn't have an emergency fund.
Wow.
My emergency fund was technically my savings for my home.
Right.
It's just that it happened to be my emergency fund because it was just the money that I wasn't touching. And I think a lot of people's emergency fund just happens to be the money they're not touching. But you need a real emergency fund, because I was actually dipping into money that I had saved for my future. That's a little bit ironic.
I always urge people that they need to look at insurance as a form of an emergency fund, because that's exactly what it is. We're talking about crises today, money in crisis, and it takes a lifetime to build up that wealth. At that time you didn't realize what your down payment became your emergency fund, but your down payment could have stayed intact if your emergency fund was your critical illness or disability insurance or whatnot. Now, you said that, obviously you had to rely on EI, you had to get all of those things sorted out. But what was that journey like, trying to figure all your finances out just before going into radiation and chemotherapy?
It was crazy, to say the least. While the healthcare sector in Ontario is one of the best in the world, everybody is different, and we all have a million and one different circumstances going on. And there were people that relied on me too. So in saying all of that, it was just a complete mess, because whatever I couldn't get done, I would have to deal with trying to figure out as I lost sleep that night. So I didn't really even have the opportunity to process the actual crisis that was going on, because I was so focused on all these financial logistics that I couldn't even begin to process, what do I need to do for my own wellness? What do I need to do for this actual situation at hand? And so I can't even imagine if somebody had something like, I don't know, an untimely death or something much more critical, how they would respond to that.
Or if they have a family to feed, a mortgage to pay, children to take care of, like all of these other factors that we don't think about. We get to this point sometimes where we think that, like I said, we're invincible and nothing's going to happen to us. Or we eat healthy. Sometimes the most healthiest people are like, yeah, I'm good. I eat healthy. I take care of myself. And I've also encountered people like that who have been diagnosed with cancer as well. Right. And I remember I got to come visit you right after your second emergency surgery. And whew, that was hard to witness. And I remember literally 2 weeks after that surgery, you had to return back to work. And I want you to just kind of like touch on that experience, because obviously I'm assuming it wasn't your choice to go back to work, but it was now survival that you had to go back. Am I right or am I wrong? And just kind of
Yeah.
explain a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I have to give a lot of credit to my workplace because they were as flexible as they could have been and above that in being able to arrange and help me to get the EI that I need, and then subsequently the time off that I needed for the surgery because it was very unexpected and I technically didn't have that time off. So I was able to get special permissions around that that may not have happened. And the thing is that I had EI for a particular amount of time. And after that, I had to return back to work. Otherwise, I had to go on what's called long-term disability. And if I went on long-term disability, while I am as left-leaning as they come, and I thoroughly I thoroughly appreciate the support from the government, it wouldn't have been enough for me to pay my rent and pay my bills. So I had to literally take a gamble that within 2 weeks, I could at least recover enough that I could work from home. And thankfully, due to COVID, because they had us working from home, I was able to, I made it out of the hospital. I was in the hospital for 12 days. I was only supposed to be in for about 6.
Wow.
And I came back on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, I'm at home. And then Monday I was back at work. And it just happened to work out that way. And I can thank the cosmic forces for that. But had it not, or had there been no pandemic and I actually had to work physically on site, I would have actually had to give up the job or go on long-term leave, which again takes an incredibly long time to actually process and come through.
Right.
And that is just crazy, you know?
You know, you just mentioned some such crucial points, and the fact that you had to pick between getting long-term disability that wouldn't be enough to maintain your cost of living on a month-to-month basis, or literally have to go back to work 2 weeks after a major surgery. And I'm talking about major, and I hope you don't mind me kind of elaborating.
Sure.
From when I saw you after your surgery, you literally had a cut from your chest cavity all the way down to your lower abdominal. At that time, you were walking with a cane. You still had a hunchback because you couldn't stand straight properly. So I couldn't imagine you physically having to go into a job in that state of condition. And I talk about this all the time, how health and wealth are so heavily intertwined with one another. We're talking about, you know, you picking between, okay, my health or literally having to go back to work to be able to maintain some sort of money to be able to carry you through. Because as you mentioned earlier in this interview, that everything stopped except for your bills. Your bills were still continuous. Nobody said, well, Adi, you know what, you're going through these tough times, let's freeze these bills, let's really, you know, don't worry, we can put it on your tab, you can pay it back in a year or so. There are no options like that. And you know, thank God, like you said, there was the pandemic that allowed you to work from home. But even then, your mental state of mind, like having to deal with such a major surgery, and then even if you're working from home, is still such a tasking job. And I can't imagine like the energy, like, whew, I'm thinking about it, and I'm getting goosebumps, and it's devastating just to hear that you know, you had to return back to work because your survival at this point was on the line. And you know, this surgery was literally just 6 months ago. This is very fresh. People, if you guys don't know, this conversation that we're having and the story that is being told isn't from many years ago. This story is literally from just a few months ago. So the fact that you had to go through all of that, it's crazy. And I think this is the story, that the part of the story that I want to highlight so much is that, you know, we don't think about these things. And sometimes it's because we're scared, or because we think, especially in our culture, we're like, well, you know what? If I start preparing for something like this, it means it's going to happen to me. Right? If I start thinking about death, and I start thinking about cancer, and I start thinking about all of these ailments, then I'm speaking it into existence. When in fact, that is not the case at all. You're putting proper measures into place. So God forbid, if something was to happen, you don't have to pick between your health and your finances, that both of them are there readily available to you to be able to take care of your whole being while you can stay at home, kick your feet up, and actually allow your body to heal. And I think that, when we're talking about this topic, stress is such a major thing that plays a role on how our health are manifesting to where they are right now, right? And so I want you to just kind of elaborate a little bit more on that journey of the financial impacts that, could have. Thank God you had your let's say your down payment that you were able to fall on. But imagine if those things weren't there, or imagine if you had to let go of your job, because if you had to physically go to the location, it would have been a completely different story as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, well, first of all, yeah, the surgery, it's called RPLND surgery, which is a big acronym for retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. And all it means is that they basically unzipped from, the chest down to my waist, took out, they got to take out all your organs and stuff because your kidneys are towards the back. Right? So if this thing is towards the back, I have to get everything else out. And in doing that, once you get zipped up and they put everything back in, there's a lot of recovery involved. There's a lot of nerves that were damaged. There was a lot of rehab around walking, eating, sitting down, lying, standing. Yeah, we saw each other, and yeah, you saw me hobbling around. I wasn't in good shape. And yeah, I would not have been able to work, fend for myself, protect others at all. And, my team, we create books. And one of the books that we created was called Mouthful of Gold. It's like a mixtape book in the sense that it's not actually published. But what we did is we wanted to make this as a social experiment to see, can we find some concepts, put it down on paper and see what happens. The reason I bring this up, though, is that one of our first concepts, it says the scary thing about fear is when you're not the one using it. And the reason I bring that up is because when you talk about the fact that people don't want to talk about things like death or critical illness or a will or preparing for the worst circumstances, this isn't about fear mongering and about doom and gloom, evil eye, jadoo, whatever you want to say. You know what I'm saying? It's just about the fact that, look, these things that you may be afraid of, some of them are inevitable. And when we start to make decisions out of fear, when we start to block things out and do things because it's safe and ignorance is bliss, well, then we're just delaying the headache that we're going to have to deal with later, instead of dealing with it in a proactive way so that we can continue to live happily and stress-free, rather than just believe that stress will come down the line.
Absolutely. Now having gone through this journey and still going through this journey, because it's not over yet, for people who don't have insurance in place, is that something you encourage somebody to look into and prepare for? Or is it something, do you believe that it's just another thing that you don't really need to focus on?
Yeah, you know what? I can safely say that, life insurance is worth looking at and worth speaking to an expert about, because where I am at now in my life, for me to now pursue insurance, life insurance, it's going to be a very different process than had I begun to pursue it before this disease hit me.
Right.
And that's not to say that I didn't have the opportunity to. I was clued into your network, and anybody who's clued into your network can access the resources and means to get the life insurance that they need within a few texts, within one call.
Right.
So it again comes back to the assumption of mortality. Right. And I say all this to simply say that there's other things beneficial with life insurance, because here I am now, I am intact, I'm getting back into the swing of things, but I'm still looking outside and seeing a very uncertain economy. I'm still looking at my pay stub and not smiling as much.
Right.
So big purchases are still going to hit me with the same pressure, and there's no sympathy card for what I went through.
Right.
And a lot of the investment benefits and savings benefits of life insurance are also worth thinking about. And don't take it from somebody who's preaching as they learn from mistake. Try to learn before the mistake even happens. There's nothing wrong with checking it out. You would probably sit down with a banking advisor to talk about a savings account anyways, or that cool credit card that gives you a free trip if you spend such and such money. Why not spend some time figuring out what you need to do to protect yourself for when it might get a little tougher to protect yourself?
Yes, and you mentioned such an important thing, that don't be the person that has to go through it to learn and learn from the mistakes. I truly believe that these conversations are so important to have, because it's not just about making our own personal mistakes, but it's also learning from the mistakes that other people have made as well. And I think that the art of storytelling is starting to die, because we don't have elders that are able to tell stories anymore. And I think that's what was the beautiful thing, was when elders were able to tell stories about their life journeys and what they learned from that. And we're no longer hearing those stories anymore, whether it's around health or money. And I think that, as much as our parents didn't know about money, I wish that they had at least shared their mishaps with it, because we wouldn't have to create the same generational mistakes over and over again. Because for me, I'm a strong believer of learning through other people's stories as well. When I sit down with my clients, or I sit down with my friends and I hear certain things, like I had my life insurance policy for the last 3 years now. And then this summer, I went and got more life insurance and more critical illness insurance, because I'm like, I need to make sure that my future health is locked in. Things have changed in the last 3 years. I need more insurance than what I needed 3 years ago. And so I'm learning from other people's stories as well. And I'm so, grateful that you were vulnerable enough to actually share your insight and share your journey the last year, because I know it hasn't been tough. It hasn't been easy, I should say, sorry. And you making it look really, really easy. You look great, by the way. You look healthy. I don't know how you feel, because obviously what you look and what you feel can be two completely different things. But the fact that you're here, you sound like you're getting back to good health. And I'm so glad that things are getting better for you. And I'm so glad that you were able to share this story with others. And I hope that all the viewers at home, you guys are able to hear Adi's story. He is just one of many people who have gone through stuff like this. I hope that you find value in the things that we don't always find value in. I hope that this is enough information for you to want to search and research more into, so that way you can be prepared. Because a lot of times we plan when we're in a crisis. The whole purpose of planning is when we're in the crisis, that we have measures put into place to mitigate as much of the hardships as possible. And that's what financial planning is all about. It's about making sure that we put measures into place that, God forbid, things do not work out the way we intended to. We have a safety net to fall into. And I'm so glad that you were able to share insight on your story and, your journey. And I hope that other people can learn through you. And I really want to thank you for your time, Adi. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your story. And I know that this is going to impact many people, because there's so many people that are going through similar situations. And the fact that you were strong enough, brave enough, and vulnerable enough to share this with us, it really means a lot to me.
Thanks, Harpreet. And yeah, taught by you, health is wealth, right? So if a healthy mindset is a wealthy mindset, then let's continue to get rich.
Absolutely. Well, there you go, folks. There you have it. All about planning before a crisis hits, not when a crisis hits. So if you're thinking about planning for your future, please, please, please hit me up. I do free complimentary financial service planning. I also offer free webinars and educations on an ongoing basis. please click on the link below in this video under the description box. And do not forget to hit that like button, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can get your latest and greatest information and knowledge around wealth, because this is what we're doing here. We're talking about money, and we're talking about all aspects of money, and we're trying to decode all the things that we have been oblivious to so many years, and here we're doing it at Money Talks. Bye guys.